Are we really doing this again? Alright.
You can't just shoot a hole into the surface of Mars.
Hello, and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today, we are going to be looking at my Holga deck. If you are unfamiliar with my channel, welcome. I've been offline for a few years. If you are familiar with my channel, although, welcome home, good hunter. Much has changed since I've last recorded a video. YouTube has changed, the game has changed, and I have changed. I'm not really the same person anymore. As you are hearing, my voice is different. This is unfortunately how I sound now, but that's not important. I might talk more on this later in the video. Over the years, a channel such as mine has become less useful. EDH Rec has made deck building much easier for most players. I've always advocated playing more obscure strategies or the underdog commanders, but those dark horse deck building ideas, they don't really work in today's era of EDH. The entire commander format has changed so much in just these past 3 years, and my personal deck building philosophies have become somewhat outdated. But this is a bit different. This is Holga. Holga here gives off what we would now call boomer commander vibes. She costs a bunch of mana, she doesn't draw cards, and she doesn't make tokens. She doesn't have some type of ward tacked onto her text box. All this card wants to do is attack. And before we get too far into the video, I'll go ahead and list some timestamps so you can jump around. Also, a few disclaimers. If you are new to my channel, then prepare for a somewhat long video. I tend to chat about various card interactions, as well as the reason why some cards are even included. Some of you will probably already understand all of these little details. My ramblings are for the players that are unfamiliar with this style of deck. If you want to skip this, then there will be a linked moxfield decklist in the description below. Also, this decklist is not optimized. Where I am playing this deck, I'm not allowed to use specific cards. The decklist I'm using in this video is built around online play using Spell Table. I also frequently use the Play EDH Discord. The current decklist is accepted by their low power rankings. Mainly this just means I'm limited on the explosive quick mana rocks and the extra combat steps that I play. I'm also specifically not playing cards that cast your opponent's spells, since those are a little tedious to play online. When I get to my list, I will try to mention some potential upgrade options. Finally, this would be considered casual at most tables. By choosing to run Holga as a commander, we are obviously not going to be compatible against more competitive strategies. Back to Holga, she was a secret layer drop. The character is from the Forgotten Realms D&D Honor Amongst Thieves movie, where she was played by Michelle Rodriguez. This card, although being a limited print only from a secret layer, it's not widely known. When looking up ideas for her on EDH Rec, for example, the suggested cards are, at the time of this recording, not exactly good. There isn't enough data of decks featuring her to pull from, and seeing how little attention this legendary cycle from that secret layer drop has received is actually the reason I'm bothering to make this video. Let's take a moment and look her over. The obvious stuff first. Holga is a 6 mana, 4 red, 4/6 human barbarian. Always fun to get more barbarian tribal cards. She has haste and must be blocked if able. That's interesting. But there's more. When declaring her as an attacker, she grants a variable pump effect to herself and your other attackers. This is based on the number of creatures each defending player owns. It's not the number of your opponent's blockers, it is the total number of creatures they have in play. This pump has some very extreme potential. Or she could just pump nothing at all. This variable effect makes each combat with her different. The semi-lure effect is, for me, the most interesting part. There will be games where you keep her in the command zone, only coming out to force an opponent's single untapped creature to die. When playing Holga, you will really need to learn when the opportune moment to cast her will be. This is absolutely not a commander to just toss out when you reach 6 mana. Holga's top-end performance is directly related to what your opponents have in play. She makes every game a unique experience. She also makes a great finisher in token builds that don't have green for overrun. But using her as a commander, she can operate well in multiple deck archetypes. You can build her for Voltron, or aggro, or group slug, or just a big red battlecruiser deck. I personally felt that blending the best cards from those strategies has made the best version of her. So let's get to my list. As per usual, I have this broken down by card type, then usually in either mana cost or function order. Starting with the creatures, here's a complement of good offensive attackers with some sort of evasion. Trample and First Strike are the best keyword combinations to take advantage of Holga's abilities. Oftentimes, it's best to stick a nice threatening attacker to try and bait out removal before we even cast Holga. Since she has haste, if one of these is allowed to survive for a turn before Holga comes into play, then the best games are when you have a follow-up Holga to swing with and grant a big boost. Some of these are designed to mess with your opponent's ability to block. You can goad a creature on a previous turn, or you can temporarily take it. These two are probably my favorite creatures to see in the entire game. We can cast them early and their menace bodies are very good at getting some early damage or holding equipment, but they actually get better in the late game. We can use the Bothersome to make specific creatures unable to block Holga, and the Robo-Doggo here is very good to equip to Holga. By giving Holga Menace, she can take down 2 creatures with her forced block ability. There are other menace effects I was considering to put in the deck, but the Robo-Doggo is by far the best. Next we have the Summoner. This is one of 2 token generating spells I have left in the deck. So with Holga you can stack it so they can still get their pump, and if you have a Sin they will stick around. Next is Karlash. She is the one extra combat effect in my deck. Again, I'm limited on this based on where I'm playing. Extra combat with Holga is very strong. I chose Karlash above all others since she gives the attacking creatures first strike, which is helpful to keep Holga alive in combat. She can be easily answered before combat, and it only works once per turn, so I can't accidentally break the game with her ability. If I could run more effects like this, then Savage Beating would be the next for its ability to just end games. Next is Godo. He is an excellent sort of card for this deck. For 6 mana, we can tutor whatever equipment we need straight into play. In recent years, some newer cards have given Godo some negative attention at casual tables. I do not run those cards. He is typically tossed out early, just to get one of the land ramp swords. If he sticks with one of those swords, then we're in a good position to get ahead. Running him also makes running Cauldra Complete a worthy inclusion, since he will be sticking a good hasty attacker right into play, so Holga can hit harder. I also do use Godo as an alternate commander for this deck. Over the past few months of playing Holga, I've met a few different opponents who strongly dislike people using the Secret Lair commanders. With that, I pull out a Godo Grandi for those occasions. The cards in this deck just so happen to make for a very fair, low-powered Godo deck. And finally, we have a few pieces of support. Burnished Heart and Solemn are for good ramp. We have a Valakut in the deck, so Burnie can be held up for late game damage. Then we have the Gearhulk, Nullspine, and Runehorn Hellkite, all for card advantage. The Nullspine we want to save for a good post-combat turn. Runehorn is typically better fit into decks that run cards like Faithless Looting, but here he is a decent attacker, and later in the game he can be an instant speed Wheel of Fortune that we want to do at the end of an opponent's turn. Moving on, I do run one Planeswalker. A personal trend I've adopted over the years is to always run one Planeswalker per deck. I had considered some others, but this particular Chandra is probably the best for Holga. She can help remove a bad blocker, she can make us mana, or she can offer card advantage. Next we are on to the spells. Tamer Battle Rage is the only one-shot combat spell I'm running. When I first built this, I ran many instant spells that gave Holga Trample and First Strike or Double Strike. Those cards did have very good results, but eventually I evolved the deck to run equipment in their place. Using permanents to grant these effects can backfire. If they are destroyed after Holga is declared as an attacker, then she can be easily killed in combat. I would recommend trying both types of cards out and finding the balance that works for you. If we have a few removal spells next. This is Volcanic Fallout. It's an instant speed 3 mana spell that does 2 damage to each creature and player, and it can't be countered. This sort of effect is very strong with Holga, because we want our opponents to have creatures to pump when you declare her as an attacker. But after you get that pump, and before your opponents can block, you can use an instant speed sweeper to get rid of potential tiny blockers. Delayed Blast Fireball is good for the exact same reason. It's also very good in a deck where you might be running some Wheel of Fortune effects, since you can hide it away and foretell earlier in the game when you don't need it. Also, a quick note on how this is worded. 6 mana for the higher damage is very expensive. But if you're running Red Impulse Draw, then you can still get the big damage side for 3 mana without casting it from Foretell. And of course a Blasphemous Act. These other spells are more for shenanigans, allowing for potential spontaneous play from hand, or an explosive turn out of nowhere. Disrupt Decorum and Spectacular Showdown are fantastic ways to tamper with your opponent's available blockers. These are even better when you pair them with Bothersome, because none of your opponents can block each other when they have to attack. Tempt with Vengeance can be a very scary game-ending card if Holga is out. The issue is that you're giving your opponents blockers. Without a global trample effect, your swarm could just be chumped down. And these last few spells are more for gaining some sort of value or card advantage. Some of these spells are very easily upgradable, where you can just run some of the more common staples that we see in EDH nowadays. If you're familiar with the normal mono red decks I tend to share, then you've probably noticed a lack of Ruination. I would highly recommend you run that card, but since I frequently play on the Play EDH Discord, that card is not an option for me. Recently, I have been enjoying Price of Progress in its place. This is a fantastic instant speed way to hurt opponents playing those greedy mana bases. It's surprising at how much damage this little card can do. I currently have 0 enchantments in the deck, but there are some good inclusions that you could run. Underworld Breach is a great inclusion. It's the best recursion we have in our colors for late game. In mono red, I personally prefer my enchantments to be more for card advantage. Or you could always play offensive ones that try to mess with the combat or boost your creatures. On to the artifacts. It wouldn't be mono red without a pile of mana rocks. The deck is running about 10 depending on how you define this as a mana rock. Based on my current mana curve, although, and considering that we're running a 6 mana commander, this deck really should have about 12 mana rocks instead. Now this is another point in my deck list where I would strongly recommend you upgrade the deck. I am only running some of these cards because I am playing Holga in a low queue. Next, we do run a single mana doubler to help boost the team. These cards that grant global +1/+1 effects will be better if you run more token-based spells, like the Other Gauntlet or the Immortal Sun, to help make your team survive better. And we do run an expedition map to snag one of the very few non-basic lands that we run. Next is the equipment. There are now 3 equipment that can land ramp us. These all work fantastically when you pair them with Valakut, allowing us to punch out a colorless source of damage with attacks. Seeing one of these equipment and any early evasive creature always makes for a good start. Godo especially works well with these, either double ramping with his attack or possibly flickering to get more equipment into play. Moving on, next is Fiend Lash. This has been surprisingly good. If Holga had the full lure effect on her, then this would probably be the best equipment in the entire deck. It's basically a build-your-own stuffy doll. Kinda. The reflected damage is based on the equipped creature's power, and Holga's power can get very high when she attacks sometimes. The reach is also constantly forgotten by my opponents, and putting this on Holga means that her force block means we can throw around free damage to any other opponent. It doesn't have to be the one blocking her. You can even follow up with some sort of burn spell like the Volcanic Fallout, causing another trigger of damage that you can throw again to another opponent. I would definitely suggest giving this equipment a try. Hex Gold is a new card I'm experimenting with. This has just recently replaced two-handed axe in the deck. The axe was fantastic as a combat trick, but the additional body this comes with, as well as the first strike and trample, makes this a very good inclusion. And these final equipment are the more offensive, threatening equipment in the deck. These are the equipment we want to sandbag until later in the game, until after Holga is in play. We don't want to expose these too early in the game, so they don't randomly get destroyed. These two living weapons are good Godo grabs, since he will put another attacking body into play. Batterskull and the Shadow Spear are good just for some lifelink to stabilize ourselves. And these last few artifacts are more for utility. The Atlas is good draw. The Mirror is a very versatile toy. It can be a surprise blocker. It can be an attacker when Holga wants to swing. It could be an extra equipment or even a copy of an opponent's land or one of their enchantments. And then there's these two. Alright, so hear me out here. Classically, in my old videos, I always suggest running one or two gimmicky, funny cards just for laughs. I'm fully aware that I'm showing my age here. But these two cards are honestly awesome with Holga. In many games, Holga can and eventually will be taken down by a larger creature. Eventually, you'll run into something indestructible, something that has protection from red, or some sort of death touch blocker. We could run a single-use spell to help with those occasions, or you could use something like this that has additional utility. Sure, you can use them to tap down a blocker, but they also stop an annihilating Eldrazi from attacking you. They can tap down big mana rocks, and utility artifacts, and most importantly, these can tap down an obnoxious land during an opponent's upkeep. Or maybe you're in my age bracket and you just want to annoy the guy playing with City of Brass. Let's wrap up the deck list with the lands. I am currently running 37 lands in the deck, 5 non-basics and 32 basic lands. I am fully aware of the powerful options of non-basic lands we have access to nowadays, but I am the sort of player that has always ran non-basic land hate, and I've trained myself over the years to rely on enjoying mass basics. So I'm keeping these 5, and I run 32 Mountains of the Urza's variety. Now this is another obvious part of the deck that you can upgrade. There are so many new non-basic lands, and rarely do people play non-basic land hate now. And that is my Holga list. This is normally the part of the video where I wave my hands around like a lunatic, talking about card interactions and cuts and upgrades. For this video, although, I thought I would show some B-roll of me enjoying one of my other hobbies. If you'd like to make a better Holga deck, then the first thing you'll want to do is to correct the mana rocks. Next, plug in the Dockside and the Underworld Breach. Add some more extra combat spells, and the more powerful staples expected out of today's EDH. And absolutely touch up the lands. Running mass basics has its benefits, but non-basic land hate in EDH has become less accepted, and rarely are new cards for that strategy printed. After those upgrades, you can adjust the deck to be more compatible where you play it. If your table is full of bouncy control players, then don't rely on as many instant speed one-shot spells, and maybe swap out some of your mana rocks for more land ramp. This way you have less to redeploy. If there's a ton of spot removal, then consider ways to protect your commander. If you see too many board wipes, then you can try to live through them. If some stacks cards tend to show up at your table, then you can build your deck to try and focus more on a quick commander kill. If you are constantly being tricked by Teferi's protection, or if you're annoyed by people looping the One Ring, then you can try some anti-damage prevention cards. And a few final suggestions to wrap up. Holga is 6 mana, without any self-protection. You will want to figure out in each game when the right time to cast her will be. I rarely slam her out as soon as I reach 6 mana. The best games have always been making her the follow-up play, when I already have a good attacking creature out available so they can benefit from her pump. And as with any sort of semi-explosive combat-based deck, do prepare yourself for the games where you are put in a position to kingmake. It's just unfortunately common with this style of deck. The deck tech is over. Hopefully I've enticed a few of you into exploring Holga as a commander. But yeah, I'm still around. And thanks for watching.